Now that we know how to connect to a database, I want to build a small application in which we have a product table and we can add products to the table, view the content of the table, delete products and also edit them. So the first thing I need to do is create a database table to hold the products, and I want to show you how it is done. So I go into the models.py file, which is the place where you can define database tables. Obviously, you could be doing it in other files as well. The important thing is that models.py file is one of the files that is imported by init.py. You see, from models import db, and this will import the db object, which in turn is imported from common. So essentially, the object in common defines the database. Here we define the tables, and this final line commits the table declarations so that they are enforced. The statement to declare a database table is db define table. So the first argument here is the table name. We can call it product. Then we use the field statement, the field function essentially, to declare each field. So the first argument is the name of the field. We want to have products to have a name, a quantity, a cost, and so on and so forth. So we can say product name. Why don't I simply say name? Well, it turns out I could say name in databases like MySQL and Postgres that are used in production. But the development database is SQLite, and SQLite has some set of names that are reserved, that you're not supposed to use, otherwise you create a clash. And so I have this habit of mine of using names that are obtained sometimes by concatenating the table name and what would be the obvious field name, in order to obtain names that are less likely to clash with the SQLite defaults. At any rate, so this is a product name. If I don't say anything, it's going to be of type string. Then I can create a product quantity. Okay, and these I want to be an integer. Okay, and I want also its default value to be 0. So that if I create a new item and don't say anything, I assume I don't have any in stock. I want to have a product price. Okay, this one is going to be a floating point number. Again, the default is 0. And then I want to have a field mail order, whether I can buy it via mail order. Oh, sorry. And I want this to be a boolean. And it's always a good idea to put a default, because you don't want to leave undetermined what happens if you don't specify. So default is equal to true. By default, people can order via mail order. Field created by. So I want to store here the author of the who created this particular record in the database. So this is going to be a string, and I want the default value, if people don't fill it in, to be the email address of the logged in user, so that if you sit in front of the web app and you enter a new product, the created by field is going to be set to your email address. So I'm going to say default is equal to get user email. Incredibly importantly, without these two parentheses. Let me explain exactly why. When you provide a default value, so this table declaration is read when Py4Web starts up, okay? And when Py4Web starts up, it reads all the table declarations, and after that, the tables are in business. So if you say default is equal to 0, this is just perfect, because when the table is declared, internally Py4Web will store, actually the database abstraction layer will store the fact that the default value is 0 for product quantity. If I say something like this, what will happen? Well, when Py4Web starts up, there is no user logged in yet, right? It may, when Py4Web starts up, is not in response to any specific request. So get user email open close parenthesis will return none. Okay, it will take this case and return none. And so the created by field, if no other value is specified, will every time be left empty, which is not what you want. So instead of doing this, you set the default value to a function. In this case, the database abstraction layer is kind enough that if the value is a callable, so if the value is something that can be called, instead of using the same value each time, it will call these functions each and every time that a new product is created, and it will use the return value of the function to initialize the field. So this is what you want to have. In this way, every time a new value is inserted, Py4Web will ask, call get user email. This will return the user email, and it will be inserted in the created by field. I can tell you it's one of the very common errors that even I make, just because of the autocompletion, I guess, to leave these parentheses, but you should not have them. Okay, so if you see always none in the created by field, check for the presence of parentheses there. Now I want to create a field creation date. Okay, there is a particular type that is called a date time. Okay, and I want to say default is equal to get time, which is this function that I defined here, that returns the time in UTC, so the universal time coordinated. Okay, this can conclude my table declaration. So, but I want to give you a few comments, and I want to add a few things here to make it even more sophisticated. So these two lines, I always include them, or I very often include them in tables. It's very useful, if not else for diagnostic purpose, to know who created a record and when the record was created. You can be even more sophisticated and add information about who modified the record, okay? But this is sort of a good minimum. Another thing that we would like to do is add validation, so that, for example, the product quantity is an integer, the product price is a floating point number, the product name cannot be left empty, and so on and so forth. So you can do that by using what are called the database validators. These are explained in the Web2Py documentation, not the Py4Web. They have to be ported, and I believe they will be ported soon. But there is an entire chapter on validators that you can use. Okay? So I imported them all already here, and we can use them by saying here requires is equal to, for example, is not empty. Okay, so I don't want empty product names. Another thing I can do here in product quantity is int in range, and I can say, for example, that valid product quantities are between 0 and 1 million. Okay, sorry, I forgot the requires. Okay, for product price, you similarly can say requires is equal to is floating range, and you can say that things can cost from 0 to again $1 million, and so on and so forth. And another way of doing this would be to say, instead of putting it here, if you like, you could also put it here. You could say db product name requires is equal to is not empty, and this would have the same effect. So you can either put it directly in the field declaration, or you can put it later. Okay, in this case I chose to put it in the field declaration, so I remove it from here. Another thing that is useful to do is this. Py4Web will be able to create forms automatically for us, so I may want to tinker with the visibility and with the name of some of these fields. For example, I may want to say db product id readable is equal to false. Every table has an id field that is automatically added, and I don't want it to be visible, so I declare it to be readable false. db product created by readable is equal to false. In this way the information will stay in the database but not be visible again. db product creation date readable is equal to false, and this also hides this, okay? db, sorry. You can also change the presented names. Py4 Web is able to produce for you input and output forms, so you can give nicknames to these fields. If you don't like to call the quantity product quantity, you could say db product quantity label, and you can say how we would like to call it. If you use the T internationalization operator, you could even give a name that will be translated in whatever language your site will be running in. And so, for example, here we can say simply quantity, and we can similarly say db product price label, and we can call this simply the price, okay? Price, well, price. So this defines a database table. I should import the T decorator actually. So the translator is T is defined in common. So you can look at the definition. Essentially, it is a translator object, and what it does is that when you give it a string, if you are using a language other than English, it will use this string here as a key, and will look up in a dictionary what is the corresponding sentence or word to be used in the target language, okay? And I wrote it this way, but of course again you could have written directly here what the label is, if you cared, okay? So this syntax of doing things directly in the field declaration or immediately afterwards are equivalent, and you use one or the other essentially for clarity. So this is how we can define a simple database table, and in the next lecture I wanted to develop the pages and forms in order to add data to it, and edit and visualize it and so on and so forth.